What up, Wizards? It's Dev. SBMTG, we like it in Magic, and today I got a deck that'll really stick it to him. Now, it might be budget, but it can stick up for itself. That's right, there's going to be a lot of stick puns in this video. You know where you are. I was going to do a bunch of fingers puns, but those didn't pass the censors.
And I'm your favorite Magic channel's favorite Magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck techs. I come correct like a porn star, slicing up all these other suckers with my sword mark.
And we're back. Now, self-promotion's coming up, and I know you hate that, so do I, but do stick around, because in this video, we got a lot to talk about, and I'm bringing back example games. I've got 2 of them to show you in this video to kind of make up for not doing them so far this season. A lot of people wanted them back. They're back. You're welcome. I mean, I have to let you know there's something cool at the end of the video. That way you'll actually watch the entire thing. It's kind of a carrot and stick situation. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. Why am I making all these stupid jokes? Oh yeah, so we're talking about this guy in this video. Oh, Stickfingers! I can't not say his name that way. Well, sticks and stones will break their bones. And that's the end of that phrase. There's nothing else to it in this case, because this guy, he just goes around breaking bones. I mean, it gets huge before you know it. There are 36 creatures in this deck. So when you go to mill yourself with this dude or anything else that does that, it's pretty much a guarantee you're going to drop some guys into your yard, and Stickfingers can get really big really quick, right? Even if you don't actually mill anything into your yard when you cast them, sometimes he's just like a 2-mana 5/5. And if you actually can pump some mana into X here, then you get some value even if it gets removed or even if it gets countered, because it's just when you cast Stickfingers. He doesn't have to enter the battlefield or anything. So this guy's going to provide some pretty good value for you, even if it doesn't stick. So even if it does die or get countered or something, it's still like the biggest milkshake in the format. This brings all your boys to the yard if you have enough mana to do so. So it really works best with stuff that cares about dudes being in your graveyard. And there's a fair amount of support for that in the format right now, but some of it is pretty anemic. We need some cards that'll really stick to your ribs. So I'm playing 4 copies of Ghoulcaller's Harvest. This is one of the few non-creature spells in the deck, so we have to be sure that we want to play it. We do. This actually forms the basis for a 2-card combo that helps finish off a lot of games, and it's just good by itself. Sometimes this will put double-digit zombies into play in the late game and force a sweeper on the opponent, but even if they have a sweeper, you can just cast it again, so it really puts your opponents in a lot of sticky situations. Now, a minute ago, I said the word combo, and then I didn't tell you what the rest of the combo was. That's infuriating. I know that. You can't do that to a Magic player, so I might as well go ahead and show you the 3 copies of Dreadhound that we're playing in the deck. That's right, Dreadhound. I was pretty sure this was a dog of a card, and definitely nowhere close to Sir Conrad. I miss you. That's right, I actually miss cards from Torn of Eldraine. It sounds nuts, but I do. But this, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to, but it turns out it's awesome in a format full of decayed zombies, and a format with old Stickfingers. This works well with a few things that we're doing in this deck. If we cast an old Stickfingers with a Dreadhound in play, we can deal a buttload of damage. It's basically X, it's like a fireball. X damage to your opponent's face in that case. But when we play it, we usually at least bolt the opponent, and yeah, we can whiff on it, but very often we'll do some damage when we play this card. It's a huge body that attacks and blocks really well. If we play Ghoulcaller's Harvest and get a whole bunch of zombies, and they die at the end of combat, we'll get damage off of Dreadhound. There's a million ways in this deck to get damage off of this card, so once we finally get to it, it's a great way to end games. But believe it or not, there's actually another 6-drop duder in this deck because he's so good, and even though it's mythic, it's budget enough right now that I could easily slip it into this deck, and that's Lord of the Forsaken. Now, if you don't have the couple of bucks or a copy of this card, or you don't have a mythic wild card to spend on this in Arena, maybe just play the 4th copy of Dreadhound. It's a really important card, but this does a whole bunch of stuff for the deck. We have a few different things that we can flash back that this effectively reduces the cost of if we have life. That's super important. Plus, it's a flample, dude, it just wins the game by itself with stats sometimes. It's also a way to get creatures in play into our yard if we want to do that and boost up a Ghoulcaller's Harvest. And when we do sacrifice dudes, we then mill cards into our graveyard. So that's another milkshake, right? So not only do we get the dude that we sacrificed in our yard, but we usually get 1 to 3 more dudes into our yard. So it really powers Harvest, really powers Stickfingers. And if we mill ourselves, we might hit a Ghoulcaller's Harvest. We're just able to cast that. So Lord does a bunch of stuff in this deck and also wins by itself. But you may have noticed that there are a bunch of really important big dudes in this deck, and not all of them cost 6 mana. Stickfingers could just cost 2 mana, but stuff like Lord of the Forsaken and Dreadhound especially are really important creatures that it's kind of nice to have out. And sometimes you might mill them into your yard on accident. Oh no, then what do? It's actually super easy. You use the Shovel Lady. the lady with a shovel, instead of actually casting a real reanimation spell, she's just going to dig the thing up. So we're going to play 2 copies of Diregrath Rebirth. I just said Rebirth. The card's name is Rebirth. But anyway, I have hopped around from 0 to 4 copies of this, building this list, but I think we need some number of this. It's a really important card some of the time. And it works really well with Decayed Zombies because they all die at end of combat, and then it's really, really cheap to cast this and get a Stickfingers, Lord of the Forsaken, Dreadhound, whatever. If an important creature dies to removal, you need it back a lot of the time. So even if you have to pay the full cost for this, you kind of don't mind so long as it's late enough in the game and you need that Dreadhound enough. But we gotta play a bunch of dudes in this deck. I mean, basically this entire deck from here on is talking about creatures. So let's go ahead and get to it because we got some work to do. I'm playing some ramp in the deck, as you may have guessed. Now, to generate treasure, I'm playing 4 copies of Prosperous Innkeeper and 2 copies of Skullport Merchant. Now, Innkeeper is really good with like Ghoulcaller's Harvest, or just the 36 creatures we're playing in the deck. It's very often that will double spell with creatures in the mid game and get a lot of life off of Innkeeper. Obviously, multiple Innkeepers is awesome, and it's really good with a Ghoulcaller's Harvest, especially if you get a really big Ghoulcaller's Harvest going on. If you have like 2 Innkeepers in play for that, you can basically just gain your starting life total back. It's not even that hard to do so. But Skullport Merchant is important to the deck too, because this can draw cards, and importantly, sometimes put creatures into our graveyard to make Stickfingers bigger at instant speed, a play a lot of opponents don't actually see as it's happening, as it's on the table, so keep that in mind. And it helps respond to sweepers, cash in treasure that we don't need, draw extra cards, and since this is ostensibly a combo deck, we need to draw some cards. Merchant is a really important dude. But we're actually not done ramping in this deck, because I'm also playing 4 copies of Tangled Florahedron. That seems like a no-brainer to me, honestly. And 4 copies of Jaspera Sentinel. In a deck with 36 creatures, I have to keep repeating it, and a bunch of, 1 and 2 drop creatures and whatnot. It really shouldn't be too hard to get Jaspera Sentinel making mana by turn 2. Again, I'm really trying to juice the creature count as much as I can in this deck, and that involves things like playing 4 copies of Florahedron, but it also involves playing 4 copies of Kazandu Mammoth. Now, I'm not going to go all the way here and play like every MDFC creature. I'm not that nuts, but I will play 2 of the best ones. They're both in green. Kazandu Mammoth is a sturdy body that you actually don't mind blocking with and putting into your graveyard most of the time, because often it'll trade, but on the play you can get aggressive with it too, and sometimes it really matters if you can knock 5 or more points of life off your opponent's life total, because say a Ghoulcaller's Harvest has to finish the game late in the game, so sometimes that early chip damage can matter a lot. But Kazandu Mammoth, again, just helps bring down the land count as much as possible while increasing the creature count. I'm all for that. But there are a few other odds and ends creatures in the deck. Like we got the 4 copies of Death Bonnet Sprout, another awesome turn 1 play for this deck. Really helps get your Ghoulcaller's Harvest and your Stickfingers going. And this is basically just like Portabelver of Secrets, Chantrelver of Secrets, all the mushroom names. This doesn't quite work the same way as Delver, but we can put 3 creatures into our graveyard, especially on 2 copies of this. We can put 3 creatures into our graveyard by turn 3 super duper easy. There's a couple of heads up plays you can make with this, but for the most part, it is synergy that is also a big creature. That's good. But we need more card advantage than I've already prescribed, so I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to play 2 copies of Morbid Opportunist and play this card. Creatures go to the graveyard a lot. They go to the graveyard a lot, mostly because we play a lot of dorky dudes that we want to block with. A lot of our dudes just basically serve as chump blockers if they have no other purpose, because again, this deck wants dudes in the yard. You don't mind chump blocking. So, stuff like this can really draw a ton of cards over the course of the game, even if it only procs the 1 time a turn. And, it does kind of feel bad to like Ghoulcaller's Harvest, attack with 8 zombies and only draw 1 card when they decay, but it's better than drawing none cards. Aside from that, I'm also playing 3 copies of Eccentric Farmer. This mills dudes into our yards, but also make sure that we hit that 4th land drop, or later in the game, that 5th or 6th land drop. That can be important. Note that the land that you get back doesn't have to have been a land that you just milled. It can be any land that's been sitting in your graveyard all game. We do play stuff like Evolving Wilds in this deck. It's budget. We might as well play Evolving Wilds anyway, but it works really, really well with this. And note, by the way, that let's say like Stickfingers puts a Ghoulcaller's Harvest on the bottom of your library in the early game. Well, you can use that Evolving Wilds out of your graveyard, thank you, Eccentric Farmer, to shuffle your library. Super deep cut on the tech there, but it's mattered multiple times. And finally, for the creatures, I was able to work in one copy of Null Priest of Oblivion here. Now, you could just play more Diregraph Rebirths. You could cut the Diregraph Rebirths and play this, but I don't like that. I like when my Reanimation spell costs 2 mana. But we've got enough ramp and treasure and stuff that in the late game especially, it is not hard at all to get to a Null Priest, bring back your Dreadhound, attack with your Decayed guys, get it done. So there's a lot of cool stuff about Null Priest, but I really don't think we need to play more than a single copy in the deck. Now here's the mana base. It looks like there's only 18 lands in front of you, but the deck does play 26 lands if you count the Tangled Florahedrons, Kazandu Mammoths, and you should. So it all works out to like 19 green sources if you count Evolving Wilds, and 13 black sources if you count Evolving Wilds. I know Darkboard Pathway is really expensive compared to literally every single other card in the deck, but it is a card that I think you need. Now here's the sideboard, and it's actually so simple this time I can give it to you in slide form really quickly. We're playing 2 copies of Tajuru Blightblade, 3 copies of Demon's Disciple, and 3 Gelatinous Cube because aggro makes me stick, honestly. We need some kind of removal in this deck. Really, we do, but for the most part, our creatures just chump block. But if we're up against mono white or some other super creature heavy deck, mono green, then creatures like this can be really, really important. But we've also got 3 copies of Acquisitions Expert when we come up against those control matchups that need cards in their hand, 2 copies of Outland Liberator to take out artifacts and enchantments, and 2 copies of Plumb the Forbidden for games where card advantage really, really matters. Now, there are a few ideas for making this deck non-budget that I think are definitely worth pointing out. There's some stuff that cost a lot of money, like the Meathook Massacre, which is like $45 right now, but I think would help out this deck a great deal, and it's worth adding a non-creature card and cutting a creature to play this. I'm fairly certain. It's like another copy of Dreadhound that's also a sweeper. Turns out that's super good, so I would probably insert Meathook Massacre if I had the money. Same thing with Agadeem's Awakening. I think you could duck a couple of these swamps and put in at least 2, if not all 4 copies of Awakening if you have it, because we've got a lot of creatures at every spot on the curve, and Agadeem's Awakening seems like a great rip in the late game. Now here are your power rankings. A final score of 62 somehow. That's actually really good for a deck this budget. Even with the pathways, it costs like $7 a piece. This deck is really only about $50. And it's so much fun. This deck is a lot of fun. And it's got a lot of avenues to victory against like slower decks, especially when you're on the play. You can just like play out your dudes and beat them down and get them to like 8 and then finish the game with like Ghoulcaller's Harvest over and over. You'll see that too in the example games where sometimes it really doesn't matter how many sweepers an opponent has. We can beat them with this deck. We cast a 10-10 Stickfingers, they sweep us. We cast a Ghoulcaller's Harvest, they sweep us. We cast the Ghoulcaller's Harvest again out of our yard, they sweep us. We cast another Ghoulcaller's Harvest, we win. Or Stickfingers, we win. So this deck has a lot of resiliency, to say the very least, and a ton of staying power, a lot of cool things to do out of its graveyard, whether you're finishing the game in style with like the Ghoulcaller's Harvest Dreadhound combo, or you just land like a 14-14 Stickfingers and go to face. Like, this deck has a lot of fun stuff to do. Now, of course, with a deck like this, it's always better to show you than to tell you, so I've got 2 example games for you today, both of which I think showcase different ways the deck can win in certain situations. One a combo win, the other one just a win because our opponent ran out of sweepers. But in this first game, we're against Black-Red Vampires, of all things. We're able to start on the play with Sprout into Innkeeper into Eccentric Farmer and get up Forest for our troubles, which is an insane start for our deck. And we go ahead and crash in because we already know it's going to be a race. Our opponent does present a Florian, so we have an interesting choice here. We actually come in with the Death Bonnet Sprout. If the opponent gets freaked out and doesn't block with Florian, that means they take 3 points of damage. If they do block with Florian, and they do, it puts the Death Bonnet Sprout in our graveyard and helps make our Ghoulcaller's Harvest better, Stickfingers better later on in the game, and then we resolve a couple of creatures that the opponent promptly shatters Skull Smashings. But that's okay. We can block with the Jasperis Sentinel, make sure they don't get free cards off of Florian, put the Sentinel in our yard, and then next turn, we're able to Ghoulcaller's Harvest for 4. Again, we know it's a race. So we get in with the Eccentric Farmer, put the opponent at 15, and then they play out a bunch of cards. Again, knowing as well that it's a race. They get in for a bunch of damage, and they're able to get a good rip off of Florian, but it ends up not actually mattering too much. On our next turn, we can get in first and end up dealing a bunch of damage while also holding up a blocker to make sure that at least some damage doesn't get through next turn. But again, we're racing. Our opponent goes to 10, We're at 11th. That means we can play the Prosperous Innkeeper and then play the Diregraph Rebirth, targeting the Dreadhound. That is going to do a little bit of damage to the opponent, gain us a little bit of life, and keep us in the game. They get one more decent turn here where they're able to Bloodthirsty Adversary into Hungry for More and put some power on the table, get a decent attack in. But by now, the race is pretty much over because next turn, we get to cast Ghoulcaller's Harvest out of our yard pretty much no matter what. And if those creatures can get to attack, it means that they'll decay, Dreadhound will in the game, and especially with a Prosperous Innkeeper or two on the battlefield, Harvest is too much for the opponent. Now in this next game, we're up against blue-white control, and I really had to show this one off to you, because I think this really can show you how well this deck plays against sweepers. Even though we're on the draw, we're able to start pretty well here with 2 Death-Bonded Sprouts. We drew into the green source, we drew into the second Sprout, so I guess a point for good luck here, but still, in just a couple of turns, our Sprouts will grow to very large sizes and end up getting a lot of important damage in on the opponent. But for the first few turns, we're just going to get in with Sprouts, try to play the Skullport Merchant after attacks, and that's going to get divided by 0. Our opponent takes a while to make the decision, but they ultimately get an Environmental Sciences here, play a land, and then just pass the turn, amazingly, allowing our Despondent Sprouts to grow to 3 3s. We can get a really solid attack in with both of these. Then we can play our land, go to play our Skullport Merchant again, and this time it'll hit the table, but not before Faithful Mending from our opponent. They discard a Memory Deluge and a Teferi, so they're getting set up really well here, but so are we with a Skullport Merchant that can draw some cards after this Doomscar. We're able to sacrifice the treasure and tap a mana to get rid of one of these Sprouts and draw a forest. That gets us to an Eccentric Farmer, but instead we will Stickfingers for a fair amount of mana, and look, we already have a 10-10 this early in the game. Our opponent will Sciences first to gain a little bit of life back, play a land, we play a land, get in with Stickfingers, but we're met with another Divide by 0, which is actually fine by us. Our opponent does get a card out of their sideboard, but they're also tapped out, meaning we can resolve the Dreadhound, which is a really important card for us. Now, on their next turn, they Faithful Mending again, gain a little bit more life, get the Reduced to Memory, and play it. They don't get the Reduced to Memory, they got it from learning, but the Reduced to Memory, the Dreadhound, we're able to swing in here, and then cast Stickfingers yet again for another few, but we leave a couple of mana open for a Ghoulcaller's Harvest. So now we have a 14-14 and 7 zombies, forcing the issue on a sweeper. Problem is, our opponent has the second sweeper of the game. We don't actually mind too much because we can just cast Harvest out of our yard, get 8 zombies, and have enough mana for a Morbid Opportunist, forcing a sweeper again. The problem, however, is that our opponent has third sweeper of the game. We draw a card off of Morbid Opportunist, sacrifice Evolving Wilds, and then play Eccentric Farmer, which will mill a Ghoulcaller's Harvest into our yard, which we have just enough mana to play. We get the Evolving Wilds back, play the Harvest, and suddenly we got 9 dudes. That'll force yet another sweeper on the opponent. They Memory Deluge to get another look at it, but honestly, they can't find it, and even if they did, they don't have the mana for it, so that is game over ultimately. That's all for this one, guys. Sorry about all the puns. I hope they didn't stick in your craw. But seriously, I hope you get a chance to play this one because I had a freaking blast putting this deck together. And like, nobody knows what you're up to. Even though it should be really obvious, nobody sees like Dreadhound and a bunch of decayed guys coming. They read Dreadhound and they're like, oh, I'm dead. This deck has a lot of fun things it can do to win a game. So I hope you get a chance to try it. Click the first link in the description. That'll take you over to TCG Player, where you're going to get it for the cheapest. You can actually get it for 50 bucks there. Most other places it cost you like 80. So give them a shot. But aside from that, just let me know how you felt about it, how you'd build your old Stickfingers deck and all that down there in the comments. Like, share the video around if you want more people to get access to budget content. I do, so please share. I know no one does that. But if you'd be the one person, it would mean a lot to me. Aside from that, you can subscribe. We're trying to get to, what did I say last time, 3 million? We've surpassed that. Well, not quite. We haven't quite surpassed 3 million. We're trying to get to 4.5 million now, but we're still stuck at like 123,000 subscribers. So make sure you sub. We got a long way to go. But aside from that, do all this stuff. Watch me play some Magic on Twitch. I will be back on Twitch very soon, guys. Sorry. A lot of you know what's been going on lately. with the stuff in my life. So you know why I haven't been Twitch streaming. I will be back very soon. Aside from that, $1 a month to help vote on content on the Patreon. That's why I'm doing Stickfingers. It's because it blew out the Patreon poll. So if you want to help like decide what we do around here, $1 a month is all it takes. Link in the description to the Patreon. And it supports the channel like a lot. Like $1 a month supports the channel a lot. You have no idea. But aside from that, I guess I'm donezo for this one, guys. So I guess I'll catch you guys later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.